When we were growing up, Ireland wasn't a part of our lives. We went to Catholic schools. There were Catholic and Protestant schools in Liverpool, and Irishness was seen through Catholicism. And that's where we had a Catholic culture. We didn't have an Irish culture. I can't remember a single lesson in school, in history, geography, politics, anything that talked about Ireland. I literally can't remember the place being mentioned in however many years of education in the school system, which is kind of weird since the majority of the kids are of Irish descent.
That was Jack Byrne, a Liverpool-based author, and my name is Martin Nutty.
And I'm John Lee, and this is Irish Stew. This episode of Irish Stew is sponsored by Irish Examiner USA, a great source for Irish-centric news from both sides of the pond. Politics, business, sports, nightlife, arts and culture, and more. It's all at irishexaminerusa.com. Hey, welcome to another episode of Irish Stew, conversation for the global Irish nation. And in today's journey, we're going to take a trip across the Irish Sea and hear a different kind of Irish story and a different accent as well. But before we hear that accent, let's hear that Dublin accent. Mr. Martin Nutty, the co-host.
Hey, John, good to be back on the podcast again. And I'm delighted that we are now making a trip across to that most Irish of cities, Liverpool. And today we have the author Jack Byrne with us. Jack has got a new novel coming out called Under the Bridge. I believe the publication date is going to be February 18th. And welcome, Jack.
Thank you, Martin. And nice to meet you too, John.
Good to see you, Jack.
So, Jack, usually what we do on Irish Stew is we kind of do a little bit of background on anybody that comes on the show so our listeners kind of get acquainted. So, obviously, we already know you're from Liverpool.
Yeah.
But this is, from what I understand, your very first novel that's going to be published. Yeah. So have you spent your whole life doing the writing thing, or?
No, I was one of 8 kids from council estate in Liverpool. And even though I was a clever kid, I never did the whole university thing, partly because it just wasn't kind of in our frame of reference. You know, we left school to get jobs. And it was actually possible for me. But I was kind of not into it. You know, at that young age, I wasn't into education. There were lots of other stuff going on. So I worked, and the last God knows how many years I've worked in various different jobs. I think one of the things that working class people have jobs rather than careers. I mean, if you're lucky, you get a trade, electrician, a bricklayer, that'll do you for life. But apart from that, the generality is that people look for pay, and a good, decent job is one that lasts. And I've done lots of them, from car factories, engineering factories, janitor, university, you name it, I've probably done it over the years.
That's an interesting arc of a career for a writer.
Well, yeah, actually, I think it's true. It's kind of one of the things that in order to write about life, it's better if you've done a bit of it, you know?
I agree. But let me ask you the most important question. Is it Liverpool or Everton?
Oh, that's a hard one, but it's not really hard. But I say one, and then a whole group of the audience will go, well, I thought that was going to be a good interview, but there you go. No, it's Everton. It's Everton for me. Although I was never kind of a big football fan. Like I said, I'm from a large family, so 8 kids. And we had Everton and Liverpool supporters in the family. So, you know, it's kind of like you can never really tell, and it's up and down. And so, but for me, officially, it's Everton.
Hey, Jack, my sport has been horse racing. I used to work in the horse racing business in New York for a long time, and I know there's a very famous race, the Grand National, that happens your way.
Yeah, even as kids, you know, it was one of the kind of seminal points of the year. You know, it was real. Everybody had the sweep. which is kind of like a raffle. You all put your name in, you all pay. Even as kids, we didn't put any money in. We didn't have any, but we would win if we got it. And there were like 8 kids, 2 parents, so there's 10 of us. So we got like 2 or 3 horses each. And it was a brilliant day every year. Really memorable, really kind of enjoyable. And then, as we got older, then it's just a huge tradition around Liverpool.
And I imagine a lot of Irish make it across for the race. They love the steeplechasing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they follow all the tracks, but the Grand National is definitely a big one. And it's quite accessible from Ireland. Back in those days, you'd get the ferry across from Dublin, and you could do it in a weekend. And I think a lot of people did. It was a huge event.
So, given your career so far, how does writing fit into that? Has that always been playing in the background as a side gig, or?
It had. Well, no, it's always been there for me. If you don't mind me saying, I listened to your podcast about your father. So it's Martin Nutty Chronicles. And you started that off, I think, very early on. You said you began to write a kind of biography of your father. I did the same thing when I was 16. I started to write a biography of my dad. My dad was just a painter and decorator. So, not an extraordinary life in any sense. And I didn't get very far with it. I wrote a few lines, but it always stuck with me that I did try to do that. And in the end, many years, even a few decades later, I think I've finally done it, or I am doing it, in that the novel Under the Bridge is the first of a series of 4. And I'm actually in the middle of writing the 4th one now. And it's set in Dublin in Wicklow, but a little bit in Dublin as well. But in 1975, so your era, Martin, I think you'd have been walking the streets in those days.
Yeah, and not the greatest time in Ireland, as you probably know. And I really did enjoy Under the Bridge. And one of the questions that somebody always asks to an author is, who is their alter ego in the book? Who do they identify with most closely? So there's a couple of main characters. So tell us about the characters, and then who do you identify with?
So the main characters in Under the Bridge are Vinny, who's a youngish Liverpool guy. He's he is an historian. He's done a history degree and he wants to do an MA. And his friend, Anne, who is mixed race, so her father was from Barbados and she has a white mother, and she's from Liverpool 8. She's a young journalist. She's basically brand new to the job, and the investigation they launch becomes her first major story. And there's an older character, Michael, who's a caretaker on a building site. And Michael came across to Liverpool from Wicklow at the end of the 1940s. He was part of a real wave of people at that time that did arrive on the shores of the UK and in particular Liverpool. And my dad made that same journey. So I was referencing earlier about, actually ending up finishing my dad's story, is that this is part of it and it runs through all the 4 novels. So they're the main characters. And I think they all have their bonuses, their good points. I think Anne is really good. Nothing would happen without her. She's clever, ambitious, determined, won't let anything stop her. And she goes after a story of a body that's unearthed on a building site. Michael is on the building site when the body is unearthed, though the remains are unearthed. And Michael's history goes back to a period when strikes, gangs, union struggles, police corruption were pretty rife in that area. And Michael has his own connection to the unearthed body. And then there's Vinny. Vinny's a bit of an up and down character. He's a clever lad, but not sure exactly what he wants to do in life. And lots of family complications come in. He actually starts to study the wave of emigration after the Second World War into Liverpool. His dad left him when he was a kid, and so he's kind of a bit traumatized by that, feels the loss. And so you have all of these things going on inside the mystery.
Jack, was there anything that inspired the sort of the plot line? Was there something in the news that got you thinking about this type of story, or what the plot hinged on?
No, not particularly. No, where'd the plot come from? I think the plot came from how do I express some of the ideas that are in the book? How do I show the circumstances of the community that I grew up in? And that existed under the bridge. Under the bridge is an area by the docks in Liverpool, Garston Docks. And I wanted a way of holding the reader. For me, the book has kind of different elements. It's a family saga. It's a mystery story. It's partly a love story. And all of those things are woven together, I hope, in a way that makes it really enjoyable and informative of that period and those people.
So what I found was, what I really did enjoy was, and it comes through in your writing and what you reference, is that Liverpool itself is a major character within the book. And the themes that surround that period, which stretch from the 1950s to the first decade in this century, and what's happening on there, you're kind of drawing a portrait of the place. But just to step back a little bit, a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast are American-based and probably have never been to Liverpool. So if you were to kind of give somebody a thumbnail sketch of the geography that we were talking about and say, okay, these are the important things that you should be aware of. You talked about Garston. You talked about the bridge. Like, what's the significance of the bridge? What's Garston, etc.? Okay.
If you draw a kind of direct line from Dublin going west, you probably hit Liverpool. So it's that close. And Liverpool was a major embarkation point for people going to the United States from Ireland, but from all over Europe. So a lot of the people who are listening, their ancestors may have actually came through Liverpool from Ireland to America. So it really is in that kind of in the transition in the middle. Liverpool is famous for football and the Beatles. They're the two main things, and the character of the people who are from there. And that character is kind of a little bit of resistance. It's always seen as a bit of an awkward place, doesn't follow the rules properly, doesn't fit in with the plan of everywhere else. And I think that's partly an Irish characteristic to some degree, that people always like to bend the rules a little bit. Garston, under the bridge, is a very tight working class community right next to Garston Docks. And you access the area under a railway bridge. And so in Liverpool, it's kind of well known that that's the area. And the people there actually, at one time, were called mudmen because the docks and because the relation to the river. There are other stories about why that's the case. But so it's that really tight-knit community. And it's a community that actually goes back to Wicklow. Not all of it, but a significant part of people who lived under the bridge emigrated from Wicklow. My dad came from Wicklow when he was about 18 years old. And I didn't really know any of this stuff until adulthood. I started, thinking a bit more about who you are, that's what happens, and how you got to be where you are. And suddenly realized there was a whole community of people in Garston that were from Wicklow, descended directly from people from Wicklow. And it's the old story, one person arrives and, tells the folks, the family, the brother, their uncle, oh, it's grand over here, you want to come? Or, they get contacted, can you put me up? I need a bed for the night. And so people come across, and that way a community is built. And so that's what Garston represents. In that sense, it's a microcosm of Liverpool. At one point, something like 70% of the population of Liverpool are descended from Irish stock. So it's a huge influence in the area, which is a contradiction that appears in the book as well, probably at the heart of the book.
Well, Jack, you mentioned the microcosm there. Let's bring it up to the macrocosm of Liverpool. I saw a quote that in 1851, or in that vintage, Liverpool was referred to as the New York of Europe. And you allude to the people coming not just from Britain and Ireland, but really coming from around the world to depart. Sounds like an awful lot of them stayed around as well.
Yeah, I mean, many people who arrived in Liverpool didn't have the fare, to get across to America. The lucky ones did, or brought it with them, or were able to earn it, save it up, and then go. But a lot of them just ended up, in Liverpool. And we're talking hundreds of thousands of people, in that period of the middle of the 1800s, those decades, literally hundreds of thousands of Irish people arrived in Liverpool, and many of them, if not a majority, actually stayed in the area. And so it has that long legacy of Irish connection, and as a huge seaport. Most of the trade with the western coast of the UK, Bristol and Liverpool, were the two main ports for trade with America. And so it's always had that connection. One of the kind of, difficult things, but in these times everybody's having to deal with, is in Liverpool over the past 20 years, some amateur historians and activists have rebuilt the knowledge about the extent to which Liverpool as a city was paid for from the proceeds of slavery. It's part of our history as well. And so all of these things, I think, make it a really interesting place.
Jack, I saw what you just touched on there. I saw a quote, "Every brick in this infernal town is cemented with an African's blood."
Yeah, unfortunately. And, we have to be honest about that. We have to open the books, as it were, and see the reality of it. And we have to recognize that, not all of the history of the countries that we're in is to be glorified and to be celebrated. And some of it, we should say, was wrong, shouldn't have taken place. And, we have to we have to do that. I think it's a responsibility that we bear today.
And I see there is a slavery museum in Liverpool.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm not sure, but I think it's one of the first in Europe, certainly. I think you've got a couple in America. I've heard of one or two. But certainly in the UK, it's the first, and probably one of the first in Europe. And again, it comes from that Liverpool being that, linking point in the trade between the Caribbean, America, and picking up slaves from the African coast. So unfortunately, it's right in the middle of that.
Yeah, what struck me also was, obviously, my understanding of Liverpool, is somewhat limited. I've only been there once when I was like a 15-year-old kid. Yeah. So I can't say I'm hugely knowledgeable about the city. But what also struck me in reading is how cosmopolitan the city is relative to other cities in the United Kingdom. Specifically, I think just by virtue of the fact that it was such a big port.
Yeah.
And so lots of people kind of came through, and some, as you said, stopped off and settled. I read somewhere that there is actually an African community in Liverpool that's probably been around, close to 10 generations. It's pretty unusual.
Yeah, absolutely. For as long as Liverpool has existed, there have been, Black people, there's no question. Sailors from all over the world arrived in Liverpool. One of the kind of pleasures I had as a kind of young guy was Liverpool 8, which is the predominant black area in Liverpool. It used to be amazing. You used to have the Nigerian club, the Sierra Leone, the Somali club, the Igbo. So you'd have these clubs that represented all these African nations, social clubs, pubs, basically. They, unfortunately, most of them got shut down in the 90s, the late 80s and the 90s, and around that period. they were closed down by the police, by the local council. They weren't the smartest institutions, but they were kind of, real homes or centres for real communities. So, yeah, there's a real vibrancy about that part of Liverpool in particular. But, yeah, throughout Liverpool, there are many cultures represented.
Just picking up on that theme, Liverpool seemed to be a very dynamic place. And then my reading of it as a young man growing up in Ireland was it got hit very hard in World War II in terms of being bombed on. And then on top of that, the port itself, the employment in the port itself declined and led to an overall decline in the city. I guess when there's this switch from a lot of manual labor on the docks towards a more kind of containerized type distribution, and that caused a decline in the city. Is that a fair description of what happened?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other aspect to that, I think you're right. Everything you've said is correct. The containerization, reduces manpower on any docks. You see the pictures of the old docks. They were teeming with men. Everything that came, you're talking about thousands, millions of tons of material had to be shifted off the boat into the warehouse. And that was, on little trucks, trolleys, barrels, bags, you name it. And thousands of men needed in order to shift all that stuff. Now you've got a crane and you've got containers and you've got one man sat at the top of the crane. You've got another one on the radio at the bottom and you got someone else in the HQ. And, literally, the numbers were decimated. There's another aspect of it as well, and that is that the economics changed and Britain's trade was much more with Europe from the 1960s, 70s on. And so that shifted the transportation over to the East Coast and the South and the East Coast. And so Liverpool, being in the perfect spot for many decades, even centuries, for trade with America, was in the wrong place and on the wrong coast for trade in Europe. And so I think that had a significant impact as well.
And just kind of picking up on this kind of like depressed state, I think your book kind of reflects that, that this period from the 1950s to the early 2000s, things are difficult there. It's kind of like a real struggle. You kind of get the sense of an aging Irish community represented by some of your characters in there.
Yeah.
So was that something that you were trying to put across in the book?
Well, I think like most places that, there's a kind of dichotomy. Society exists on different levels. In 2008, Liverpool was the European capital of culture. And, for art, for writing, for music. And that was a big celebration in the city. Millions of pounds were poured into it. The whole city centre got a facelift and so on. There's been a huge development called Liverpool One. And it's kind of like half the city centre was rebuilt. And so there, now I think it's been open, I'll probably get this wrong, but 10 years, I think it's been open. But it was a huge development, and all the best retail names and shops and cafes and restaurants and bars and all that exists. And so you walk into the city centre, then it's sparkling glass and retail units. You have Liverpool and Everton football clubs, which are worth billions, and bring millions of people into the city. And so you have all that kind of dynamism and that economic activity taking place. But the question is, where is the money going? And there are large places, large working class estates around Liverpool that don't see very much of it. The place that I was brought up wasn't Garston. It was kind of next to it. The people moved from Garston to newer houses in Speke. And the most significant development in Speke that I could see through that period was the council built more trees. And they built more trees on the route from the motorway into the centre of Liverpool. And it really looked like the trees were there to hide Speke, not to improve the environment or as a green initiative, but so people didn't have to view, the working class as they go to the new sparkling centre. I mean, all that sounds a bit kind of, I don't know, like not accepting or not enjoying the benefits. It's just, sometimes the benefits could be shared out a little bit more equally to give everyone a part in the success.
We certainly see that here, in New York, and a lot of, I grew up in a small industrial city in Connecticut, about 100 miles from here, and it was a major kind of metal manufacturer, like ball bearing plants and produce silverware, tableware. And, it just all started disappearing in the late 50s, early 60s. It started getting outsourced to Taiwan, and downtown kind of collapsed on itself. And it's a struggle.
Yeah, I think lots of places are going through the same kind of things. I think, though, one of the things that I like about Liverpool, I love about Liverpool, and Martin's right that, it has seen some difficult times, but it's the character of the people. And, they are funny, they are lively, they don't give in easily, and that, I hope a lot of that spirit comes through in the book. So even in difficult times and difficult periods, people are still able to have a laugh, to have an ease up, to enjoy themselves, and to make the best of what they have.
Now, I'm just going to kind of revisit that alter ego question that I gave you earlier, that you seem to have dodged a little bit. Because one of the things that's interesting, I'll tell you the character that I assume is you now after talking to you for a while, is Vinnie Connolly, who is the history student. And what's shining through here is your interest actually in the historical background of the city. But the other aspect, I guess, is that Vinnie is struggling with is who exactly is he? Is he Irish? His father was Irish. Is he English? He was born in England. Or is he something totally different? Is he Scouse?
Yeah.
And maybe you can explain to American listeners who might not be familiar with the term Scouse what exactly that means and where it comes from.
Okay. Scouse is what people from Liverpool are called. They're called Scousers. And the accent is a Scouse accent. Mine is definitely not as strong as it used to be. It's kind of worn off through travels and so on. Originally, it comes from lobscouse or labscouse, which was a Scandinavian stew. So again, going back to that, connection to the sea. And so the place is named after a Scandinavian name for a sailors' food, a kind of stew that they ate. And so that's where the name comes from. Vinnie is a bit tortured in that sense. He didn't know his father really. He's born in Liverpool of Irish stock, but without any Irish culture or influence in his life, which is a kind of niggling thing for him, which is why he wants to study the emigration into Liverpool. It's kind of, him searching for his own roots, if you like. And then that dilemma becomes an issue, not just in the book, but I think in real life. There's a thing where people at football grounds, talking about Liverpool and Everton, a banner appears, not all the time, but has appeared a couple of times, which says Scouse, not English. And so there's a very strong regional identity, which says that, we are a people separate from some other aspects of the country. Obviously, they're part of the same community on a national level and so on. But there's that regional identification that's saying that there's something different about this place. I think part of that maybe comes from this thing about, talking about Ireland and the movements of people into Liverpool. Well, for most or the many decades in the second part of the last century, there was a military struggle taking place in Ireland. And what that meant for descendants of Irish stock in Liverpool, it creates that kind of, who am I? Where do my loyalties lie? And how do we deal with this situation? It wasn't an easy time. It wasn't an easy period, not just in Ireland itself, obviously, but also in the UK for people of Irish descent. Special laws were passed. There was kind of an atmosphere. of, kind of rejection of the IRA and anything to do with Irish culture was seen as somehow connected to the nationalism and to a liberation struggle. And so there was that kind of, tenuous nature about it. And I think that infected people, and it really does. It means that people can't celebrate their culture and who they are. Just one last point on this is when we were growing up, Ireland wasn't a part of our kind of our lives. We went to Catholic schools. There were Catholic and Protestant schools in Liverpool, and Irishness was seen through Catholicism, and that's where we had a Catholic culture. We didn't have an Irish culture. I can't remember a single lesson in school in history, geography, politics, anything that talked about Ireland. I literally can't remember the place being mentioned in, however many years of education in the school system, which is kind of weird since the majority of the kids are of Irish descent. So there's a conscious policy of denationalizing, deculturizing, I don't know if that's a word, but removing the culture and replacing it with Catholicism. So there's lots of kind of, bits taking place. So, but I'm not dodging your question. Who is my alter ego? I think I'm in a bit of all of them. I know the clear one is to say, you must be Vinny. You're talking about history. You're doing all this. Yeah, you got to be Vinny. Actually, no, I think that I'm in a piece of every one of them. Michael, even Anne, the young, ambitious reporter who wants to make it in the world, then, that's partly me. I hope that answers you.
Okay. It's a bit of a dodge, but, I'll let you go with that one, But
he's saving this for, the NPR interview or something like that.
It's holding out on us, But tell you what, since we've been talking about the book, so do you have a passage of it that you'd like to read?
Yeah, if you give me a second, I'll just pull it up. Where is it? It should be here somewhere. And just to kind of put it in context, it's from quite early in the book. And it's to do with Vinny, the guy that Martin referenced. And this is where he's going to meet a professor at university. He's trying to get on a master's course, and he needs to have this interview to see if this professor will supervise his scholarship, what he wants to research. And so it's quite an important point in his life. Okay, so let me just find the best place to start. Okay, so he goes into this impressive building. He looks around. It's part of the original buildings for Liverpool University. And so it's kind of marble floor and, solid wooden staircase, and everything, looks gorgeous. And this is where he knows this is where he wants to be. This is the future that he wants. But he's got an appointment, so he has to see a Dr. Sheehan. So Vinny, he found her, Dr. A. Sheehan, room 4B. The brass nameplate shone yellow gold with age. Tiny, almost visible swirls indicated years of assiduous polishing. Vinny knocked lightly and waited before inching the door open. The heavy oak door swung too easily on its hinges, opening faster than he'd intended. The first thing he saw was a crucifix. The body hung heavily, with arms outstretched, sinews and muscles strained, a crown of thorns with sharp points sticking out at the world or embedded in the skull of the drooping head. Rivulets of deep red blood were streaking down a pained, angular face. Fuck, Vinny thought. Yes? Someone from within called out. He opened the door wider. Sorry, Sheehan? Professor Sheehan? The woman behind the oak desk looked busy, distant, turning away from the computer screen to face him. Yes? She said again. Vinny, Vincent Connolly, I have an appointment. Ah, come in, Mr. Connolly. She checked her wristwatch and smiled. Entering the room, he closed the door behind him and made his way over the carpeted floor to the chair facing the broad oak desk. I'm sorry, forgive me, I get so carried away at times. Is it Vincent? She asked, pushing her glasses high on her head They balanced precariously on her bunched-up hair. Yes, it's Vincent. He hoped the formality would equate with gravitas. He took a deep breath to try and settle himself and sat upright, leaning slightly forward. So, Vincent, she started looking through the papers on her desk. How can I help you? I raised the idea of investigating Irish immigration to the UK after the Second World War. I have the emails here. He rifled through his bag. Ah, yes, that Mr. Vincent Connolly. No need. With a wave of the hand, she released him from his search. I remember. She smiled, leaning back in her chair, her arms resting on the black leather. On the shelf behind her head, he could see a number of her titles, including her most celebrated work, The Making of Modern Identity, A History of Liverpool. Dr. Sheehan's voice was soft and melodic. He couldn't quite work out the accent. Go on, I'm listening. Vinny took a breath and launched into his practice spiel. There is a wealth of material available from the 1840s and 50s on the effects and consequences of the famine and mass emigration from Ireland. There has, however, been very little research on the scale and impact of changes since then. Everything seems to stop around World War II. Some of the largest changes in the structure of Liverpool have been since that period. The slum clearances, the building of new housing developments on the edge of the city. This was all happening when there was a shortage of labour. This shortage was partly filled by returning troops, but it also required an influx of Irish workers. Okay, that's a fair point. And although I think some people are beginning to look into this, you are correct. It's an under-researched area. Can I ask what your interest in this is? Are you Irish? Vinny allowed himself to relax back against the chair. No personal interest, he said. I just think it's an area rich in potential. It's a period when a lot was going on. The city was changing, not only geographically, but culturally. It's also when the Scouse identity was being developed. Connolly is an Irish name, isn't it? She asked. I guess so, but I was born here, Vinny said. So you are English, Irish, and Scouse? She asked. Vinny thought for a moment. He'd never heard it put that way before. Does it matter? He asked. Not to me, she replied, but you may find it does to you.
That's great, Jack. And, you know, that's such a big part of what Martin and I are talking about, you know, that sort of shades of Irish identity and rediscovering Irish identity and, you know, what it means in different places. So that's a perfect reading for us.
All right. Thank you. I'll tell you one of the things that I have to work really hard at, and I'm really proud of, to be honest. And that is not so, you know, I like the historical stuff, and you can tell, you know, I've kind of done the background reading, but making it a thriller or a mystery and, you know, getting the reader to want to know what's on the next page, what's in the next chapter, that takes, you know, a lot of work for me. I mean, it might come easy for other people, but for me, that's one of the things that I really have to work harder. And it's really important because I think without that, without people really enjoying it, without it being a good story, then everything else is kind of a bit worthless, gets lost, if you know what I mean.
Can I ask, you alluded to the fact that Under the Bridge is the first of 4 books. So you got a quartet of books out. And you said you're finishing writing the 4th.
Yeah.
That kind of shows a fair degree of ambition when you don't have one published even yet.
Yeah.
So to what degree are all these mapped out? Is everything done in your head even before you kind of started out in the first, or did it grow organically, or how did you attack that?
It's there are 2 terms that people generally use, you know, a planner or a pantser. And pantser is you fly by the seat of your pants. You don't work out any structure or outline. And that's me. So I think for me, so for example, just on the 4th book, the characters run through. So it's kind of part family saga. You know, you end up in the 3rd book, the son of Vinny is involved in a kind of mystery. So Vinny's son has grown up. He's a young adult now, and he's involved in a mystery. And so it's got those family connections through it. And so I have to work really hard at that. In the last book, Ireland, part of it is set in Ireland in 1975. And so I do a lot of reading around that. I read the history, I look at, YouTube videos, I talk to anyone I can, find out what the atmosphere was like, what the experience was like. And then from that, you build up the story. That's how it works for me. So doing that reading, I don't start with, this is going to happen, this is going to be the plot, this is going to be the mystery elements. I start by reading everything I can get my hands on about the period, looking at individual stories about the period, listening to the music, and then things will start to come through. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good experience. Why don't I use that? And it's that kind of thing. One of the things I heard recently, which is going to feature in the book, is Brendan Byrne singing. I think the title is The Hunger, but the song is The Jingle Jangle. I don't know if you know it, but people out there, look for YouTube, Brendan Byrne or his brother Dominic Byrne singing The Jingle Jangle, and it's about Mountjoy Jail. And, just finding that song, you think, oh my God, that's great. And then how can I use that?
When Martin and I were talking about this interview in Liverpool and everything, we talked about Brendan Byrne and how he had come to Liverpool on a bombing mission and got caught. And actually, he didn't end well, but it did. The experience in the Borstals in England seemed to kind of reorient him. So he lost some of that revolutionary fire because he was treated well.
Partly, yeah, because he met people in Borstal who were like him, except they were English. I think, Martin will understand if you say that everyone tells a story. And in Ireland, and it's understandable, a lot of the story was, the English are this, the English are that, the Brits are this, the Brits are that. And, you get the real feeling from Brendan Byrne that I think he was 16 when he came to Liverpool. I'm not much older. I think he was 16. So he really didn't know anything except the stories that he'd been told. And he came to Liverpool with kind of dynamite sellotape to his legs, coming down off the boat. But then going to Borstal and meeting real working class English people and thinking, well, actually, these people are not my enemy. These are not the people who've done whatever has been done in Ireland. So, yeah, it's that journey. But Martin, you must have experienced that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, I'm mindful about the whole Mountjoy thing, and the song you're alluding to is actually one that I've been known to sing. It's called The Old Triangle.
That's right, yeah.
And actually, I had a couple of uncles that were locked up there during the War for Independence. But
it's a great song, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess my experience is a little bit different because my mother is English. She's from Carlisle.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm a mixture.
Okay.
If you ask me what side my sympathies fell on in the struggle between Ireland and England, if you want to think about that early 20th century struggle for independence, I line up with the Irish, the underdog, etc. But I've always been wary of oversimplification. And I think that is something that plagues us all. If we have the opportunity to kind of reach out and meet other people from other cultures, I think we all grow from that experience. And usually what we find out is things are not so simple or so black and white. They're more complex. So that's been my experience so far. And certainly fetching up in New York probably enhanced that even more because it's such a cultural crossroads, as is Liverpool, That's one of its great virtues, as I understand it. But what's interesting, I guess, is, after this kind of period of almost, late 20th century blight seems to be the reemergence of Liverpool. And how it's starting to remake itself. And it is a different place than the rest of England. Like I took a look at the Brexit vote and I noticed that Liverpool opposed Brexit, whereas actually a lot of the Midland England, were in favor of it. So there is this sharp divide, this kind of Scouse difference, this more outward looking, this more acceptance, it seems to be in Liverpool. Would you line up with that, or
no? I think it exists. It's part of the Liverpool story. It's an interesting thing on that Brexit vote. The Hillsborough disaster, where 98 Liverpool fans were killed in a kind of crush in Sheffield, Hillsborough, Sheffield Wednesday football ground, and FA Cup final. Was a huge thing, all parts of the city, almost every family knew somebody, a neighbour or somebody down the road or an uncle or cousin, or somehow people were connected to those people who died. One of the results, though, was, one of the tabloid newspapers in the UK, one of the most right-wing and one of the most vicious is called The Sun. And they ran stories denigrating the Liverpool football supporters, blaming them for the deaths of their colleagues and friends and family. And literally, saying that Liverpool supporters were stealing off other people as they were dying or whatever. Horrible, horrible stuff. But one of the results was that there was a campaign in Liverpool for newsagents to stop selling The Sun. And The Sun is no longer sold in Liverpool. And The Sun is one of the most right-wing papers in the UK and campaigned viciously and vociferously for Brexit. And so that's a real, about the influence. Obviously, there are other forms of media that, still exist in Liverpool, including the Daily Mail and all the rest of it. But it's significant, that you remove that kind of source of poison, then, you're kind of like pulling it out and allowing the body to, heal itself, to become healthy again. And I think there's an element of that in the Brexit vote that you talk about, and in the regional identity of Scouse. There's no question it's hugely important to people in that area. And rightly so, people are proud of where they come from, the people that they're a part of.
Can I ask you about the challenge of getting published, being a first-time author? I see you're lined up with a publishing house called Northodox, whose mission seems to be to kind of promote literature out of the north of England, as opposed to the quaint Cotswold-type stuff that maybe is kind of antithetical to the Liverpool experience.
Okay, so on my particular journey, I started writing seriously again. I mean, like I said, I started at 16, and I've always written a bit, but it's kind of really I'm sure people out there will recognize this if they're trying to write. It's really demotivating if you're writing and nothing is happening with it. It sits in the drawer, it sits on your computer, and that's it. You like it or you think it's good, you show it to one or two family members, but it doesn't go any further. It's not worth the time and energy to produce stuff. But whenever I could, I did. I did a play a few years ago with a mate we took to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. I did a play for a campaign in Liverpool, mesothelioma, where people get cancer because of exposure to asbestos. So I did a play for them. And so it was that kind of thing. I wrote a novel about 20 years ago. So after starting to write my dad's thing, I did write one kind of in my 20s, I think, but it sat on the shelf next to me. I didn't have the money or the connections to pursue it, to kind of, do anything with it really. What changed it all for me was the internet and self-publishing. I thought, sod it, I can write a book, I can self-publish it on Amazon, and if nothing else, I'll give it to my kids. You know what I mean? And so there's a real point for doing it. And I did that, and I that's what Under the Bridge started from. I thought, I'm going to finish it. There's a guy here, an Irish guy at the time, who started reading it, Ronan, and he said, carry on, mate, it's good. Just those little bits of encouragement. But that goal that I could publish it, even if no publisher wanted it or no agent was interested, I could publish it. And I was very close to publishing it, self-publishing it on the internet. I'd written off, as people do, to, agents and to publishers. I had, 50 odd rejections, I guess, so far. I'm still getting them now. You write to these places. Some of them don't reply for 6 months or 12 months, literally. So I still get the odd rejection letter now saying, no, sorry, it's not for us. But yeah, the book is coming out. So Northodox picked it up. This is the first book for Northodox. This is the first of their publications. And I think that's kind of important as well. If Northodox didn't exist, I'm not sure if I would get published. If this book, I think it's good enough. I think, but I think the subject matter, the location, the setting are not to everyone's taste. It's not, I think working people will love it. That's my hope and my ambition. And I think it's clever enough for everyone else, including university professors, to read it and to learn and get something out of it. But my target audience are working people, because they're the people I come from. They're the people who inhabit the story. It's about them and their lives. And, but that's my story of publication. Northodox came along just at the right time. They were actually the last people that I sent a query off to. And they picked up really quickly, it has to be said. They read the first kind of sample that you send them. They said, can we see the whole thing? And within a matter of a month or so, they said, yeah, we love it. We want to go with it. So it's great for me. Yeah, let's do it.
And Jack, what's the Northodox refer to?
It's actually a name of one of the founders of the company, but it's a kind of fortunate name if you think about North, about writing from the North, and you could squeeze in unorthodox in there as well, so you could kind of play with it. But I think it actually is, the guy's genuine family name.
Interesting. Well, I think we probably are at a good point to let the listeners know more how they can be Jack Byrne readers with our shameless plug.
Okay, here we go. So Under the Bridge, published February 18th, so that's next week. You can find it on Amazon, or you will be able to find it then on Amazon. In America, you can order it through Barnes & Noble. In the UK, you can get it through Waterstones. And internationally, then, through Amazon or directly from the publisher. So northodox.co.uk. The ebook, the Kindle, and the paperback are all available. And within a couple of months, hopefully, the audio book will be available as well. The one other thing I'd like to ask is if there are reviewers, bloggers out there, other radio stations around America, if you're interested in this subject. And although we've talked a lot about Liverpool, I think for me, the importance of the whole series of books is it's the Anglo-Irish kind of connection over the past 100 years. And it's all in there, and it will all be in the 4 books. And that, I think that's relevant, not just to, that small community in Liverpool, but literally to the global Irish community about, what the issues people face today are, not just in Liverpool, but internationally.
Yeah, that's great, Jack. And, it's certainly consistent with what we're trying to do on this podcast by bringing in different Irish voices. And so just to remind the listeners, Jack Byrne is the author. The book is called Under the Bridge. It's part of a quartet called the Liverpool Mysteries. And we hope you buy it and provide Jack some feedback. He's working hard on book number 4, and we look forward to plowing through the next 3. And I'd like to thank you.
No, I want to thank you guys for inviting me on, for being interested, and for making it an interesting discussion. My only regret is I didn't get more out of Martin about Ireland in 1975. At some stage, I'd like to pick his brain a bit more. All right.
You're certainly welcome to do that at any point in time. I'm happy to be fodder for your creative juices.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you as well, John.
Well, Jack, I hope we have you back at least by the time book 4 comes out.
I look forward to it.
Well, great to bring in an entirely different voice into our global Irish conversation. Love that Liverpool accent. Martin?
Yeah, I really enjoyed that conversation with Jack. And you know what shone through to me about our discussion is the fact that he is a working class author writing for a working class audience. And that's important to him. He kind of identifies very strongly with that post-war Irish immigrant group that came in and provided Liverpool the labor that they needed following the devastation experienced in World War II. And his book embraces and reflects and educates us on that front.
I was really fascinated because I'm aware of Liverpool as a major city in the UK, and I was aware of its role to a certain extent as a kind of hub of immigration. But I learned a lot about the city, and I found that great. I learned about the wealth of the city, and we got into the decline of it as well, and then the bouncing back. So Jack has a sense of history that he brings to his work, and he was a great guide to what's going on there at the current moment. And then, of course, that idea of, as we were sort of exploring Irish identity with him, that such a massive Irish population in Liverpool, yet Jack didn't really feel Irishness. It was more that Catholic Protestant divide, Irishness through the lens of Catholicism. Very interesting. It took me by surprise.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned here. And in truth, I only really understood Liverpool from my teenage years when I had a spotty face and was soccer mad. I was an Everton supporter. And so Liverpool was the home of Everton, but also the Liverpool football team. And that's a great rivalry. But Jack taught me a lot more about the city. And his book, Under the Bridge, reveals all sorts of aspects of the city that I was never really aware of. And so even though it's fiction, it not only does it entertain, not only is it a mystery, but it also educates. There's not much more you can ask from any book, I think. Hey folks, thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. And
if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts and aren't sure of how to post a review, we explain it all in our blog at irishstewpodcast.com.
Irish Stew is produced by John Lee, Martin Nutty, and Bill Schultz. Editing, mixing, and mastering by Bill Schultz. Music on Irish Stew was composed and performed by Rosa Nutty, with Donald Bowens on drums, Cathal O'Riordan on bass and synthesizer. For more on Rosa Nutty's music, please visit rosanutty.com.